Hi, welcome to session 4. Um, we've so far covered development as a complex, contextual, and power-laden process. And then we looked at ethical guidelines for evaluators. And then we've also looked at an overview of gender responsive evaluation and equity focused evaluation, and why they are important, why it is important to include gender and equity within evaluation processes. And we've also looked at how we can identify or analyze the inequities among the worst of groups, or the marginalized, how we could identify the marginalized or vulnerable groups. So with that strong background, we then now focus on preparing for a focused and gender responsive evaluation to see what is needed, how it can be done, and look at the different prerequisites for have planning for a successful gender responsive and equity focused evaluation. So we look at planning, so looking at evaluation plans and then deciding on issues of modality and budget, and then we shall explore how agencies or teams of evaluators and institutions can prepare for gender and equity focused evaluation. So the UN Women draws some kind of process illustration, and we could follow that in our discussion. Yeah, so as you can see, the process of gender and equity focused evaluation follows this kind of path. You have planning, and then followed by preparations, and then the actual conduct or implementation of the equity focused evaluation, and then reporting of equity focused evaluation information, and then the use and follow up of the information generated from the process. So let's begin on planning. So evaluation, of course, is essential for any project success, because it assesses any kind of performance, or whether the project or intervention is achieving its intended goals as had planned. So, and again, we know already that evaluation happens periodically. Could happen before the project, during project, or after project, or even as a follow-up to see sustainability of certain impacts. So it should be planned for during the design if interventions must be successful. So of course, because designing affects evaluability, or the ability to evaluate, for an intervention to be evaluated. Planning for evaluation would also affect the quality of indicators essential for evaluation, but also planning by also planning for evaluation depends on monitoring information, of course, later on, and evaluation also yeah, uses evaluation also depends on the available resources or feasibility in terms of technology or resource capacity of any agency or evaluation team, and therefore it is very important to plan for evaluation if we must have a very successful evaluation process. So, of course, this is in general, but even when it comes to equity focused and gender focused evaluation, planning is very important. So, of course, we must have evaluation plans because the resources are always scarce, and therefore prioritization is very important. And also planning itself for evaluation would aid managers or evaluation team or agencies to mobilize and consolidate the ever scarce resources to be able to prepare for a better and successful evaluation process. So just again, the fact that we go beyond just evaluation during equity and gender focused evaluation, the fact that we go beyond that itself requires more resources, and therefore evaluation plans can help in this case. And of course, evaluation plans can also act as a guide, a guiding tool, because knowing when and how to track and assess results is very key, because we can then make we can then forecast and make plans to challenge or to address those, to forecast those challenges that we might face during data collection, analysis, and dissemination. And therefore, in this case, evaluation plans also act as a guide to inform or to inform the management or evaluation teams to follow certain steps accordingly. So these are the essential steps to consider on evaluation planning. One is identifying evaluations to be done. What kind of evaluation? Is it internal? Is it external? Is it process? Is it impact? What kind of evaluation must be done? Then consider evaluation activities. Do activities involve maybe participating with community members, or is it an RCT kind of evaluation? Is it does it involve going to the field to use qualitative data, or is just desk data to do desk kind of evaluation? What kind of evaluation activities are needed? And then, of course, after identifying the evaluation and the activities, plans, the draft of evaluation plan is made, and then of course the draft is just a mere proposal that can be presented to an institution or management that is planning to carry out evaluation, and then seek approval for that particular plan. And then, of course, after seeking that plan, after seeking approval for that plan, if indeed the plan is approved, then it means evaluation would be implemented. But then the question is that it does not just it does not just stop at approval. Even during implementation of the evaluation plan itself, there must be periodic reviews and update of the plan, because again, remember context. During implementation, some contexts may require some changes within the evaluation plan. So it is very important that the evaluation team or management considers that kind of periodic reviews and update basing on the reality on the ground during implementation of evaluation. So of course there must be also the tracking and reporting of evaluation status to be able to know how far or how successful the plan is doing. So planning and deciding on evaluation type and modalities. One is that, of course, yeah, the type is very important, and it influences the level of analysis and use and timing of evaluation. And some of the considerations to put into mind when deciding on what type or modality of evaluation is, you look at consider issues of the purpose of evaluation, whether it is for making changes, or whether it's on cost effective measurements, or whether it's looking at outputs or outcomes or impacts. So the purpose matters. Audience also matters, considering that in this case, since we're talking about gender and equity focused, so the audience in this case include indeed women, men, boys and girls, or other categories of marginalized people who should be mainly considered in the evaluation process. And another thing to consider when planning or selecting the kind of the kind of type, the kind of information needed for learning is also very important. So what's the purpose? Who are those that we target? What kind of information do we need from them? So those are some of the key questions one could ask themselves when deciding about the type. But of course, also the evaluation scope, in terms of when evaluation is shall be done, where it shall be done. So in terms of also intervention coverage, how big, how much of the intervention do we need to evaluate? What themes can be considered, and of course, in what limitations are available for to be challenged during evaluation. And again, the resources available, because the resources will then define the scope itself, and therefore it's very important that that can be considered. But of course, also planning also must involve aim at selecting the modality in terms of who will manage the evaluation. Is it individual or individual managers, or so, or individual agencies, or it's joint evaluation between different organizations or stakeholders in this case. For instance, if you look at the UN programs, if they are to do evaluation, sometimes there in most cases there is this kind of joint evaluation, considering that there are many agencies involved in implementation of the UN programs. So the budgets for the budgets for evaluation are important during planning, because since evaluation is one of the core functions of the intervention, then particular amounts of resources must be generated and focused on evaluation as a main activity of assessing whether the interventions are doing well or not. Planning and budgeting process must be considered within the planning process or of any intervention, but also making sure that a budget for evaluation is put aside or included in the overall budget. So, of course, some of the costs consider when planning for evaluation, those may include resources for this the evaluation for the staff within the agency, costs regarding uh, uh, the actual conduct of the evaluation, whether it's consultants that are doing so and therefore need to be paid, capacity building costs instead in assuming that in some cases evaluation team requires some training and so if we take an example, you could have an evaluation team that is selected but requires training in terms of gender sensitivity or gender response, or how to do to identify intersections of factors that disadvantage particular groups. So all that is part of all that requires capacity building cost. And of course also communication costs. For instance, if we are saying that evaluation information is of no is useless if it is not used, and therefore there must be some level of communication, but communication also begins just before evaluation, during planning for evaluation, during implementation for evaluation, after evaluation, including also making up reports and disseminating information. All that is part of the communication that require particular costs. So it is very important that a special budget is also considered for evaluation activities if the organization wants indeed to learn about a particular intervention. So we've talked about planning, and therefore that lays a ground for 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 the equity focused evaluation process. So the assumption now is that, okay, let's assume that we already have now our plan in place, and the budget is in place, and the agency or the management of a particular intervention is ready to do the evaluation process. So what follows is preparation, and preparation involves quite a number of activities that must be done in order to make sure that a strong ground is laid for implementation of gender and equity focused evaluation. So let's dig deeper and as into preparation as, of course, the main gist of this session. Okay, so preparation for evaluation involves different aspects, and about of them, mostly seven of them, and one of them is to begin with evaluability assessment, which has to do with determining uh, what dimensions are available for evaluation, or whether they can be evaluated indeed. Then two would be stakeholder analysis and engagement, which involves identifying evaluation stakeholders, including the worst of groups or marginalized groups, or the poor or women in this case, or children as well. Then that would be followed by identifying the intended use and the intended users of the evaluation processes, or data and information, then identifying potential challenges in promoting and implementing equity focused evaluations, and then selecting who does evaluation, uh, whether it's consultants or any other, and then of course also involves development of terms of references. So that we're going to dig a little bit more on each of these components of preparation for evaluation. So again, adopted from the UN Women 2015, you can see the sequential stages of preparation phase for equity and gender focused evaluation. So let's begin with, of course, appointment of you have appointment of manager, because he's the focal person to make sure that the evaluation goes well or is implemented and so on. After that, you have evaluability assessment, and then followed by stakeholder engagement, development of terms of reference, and then selection of evaluation. So to begin with, it's appointment of manager, evaluation manager. So evaluation processes require a person or a manager to organize, control, lead, coordinate activities that have to do with planning, that have to do with designing and implementation of evaluation process. But the manager can also has a role of providing general guidance to the evaluation team, and the manager can also help in resource mobilization and consolidation, but also coordinating such resources if they are available to the evaluation team. So, of course, with the evaluation manager and other essential arrangements in place, then preparation of gender and equity focused evaluation may commence with the next stage. So in this case, in this regard, we are saying if the evaluation manager is appointed and as a focal person who guides and controls all the processes or leads the processes of evaluation, if we need such a competent manager who is ready to guide the process, if that person is available, then evaluability assessment as the next phase is then essential, is then important to look at and implement. So evaluability is best and normally done at the beginning of intervention, but may be also done at any point of evaluation implementation. Because remember, we talked about the idea that the evaluation plans can periodically be reviewed and updated. And if so, then evaluability applies at any other stage as long as evaluation is needed to happen. So let's look at determining the evaluability of equity and gender dimensions of interventions. So evaluability assessment reviews the program design. It reviews availability of relevant monitoring and evaluation, monitoring information and data, and it also reviews conduciveness of the context in terms of feasibility of evaluation. So, of course, the whole idea is not just to assess and review and keep the information, or to not to assess just for purposes of doing it for formality, but the whole idea is evaluability is done to determine whether an intervention can be evaluated, or if evaluation if evaluation is justifiable, feasible, or useful. or to or if evaluation can achieve its purpose with the defined scope. So remember, during planning, all these issues have been laid in the proposals, and so in this case, the evaluability assessment is determining whether indeed if we have planned or we've aimed at evaluating the intervention, is it can it be evaluated? Is evaluation justifiable or feasible or important at a particular phase of time, or the scope that is defined, is it feasible and justifiable, or does evaluation can evaluation achieve its purpose within particular time or geographical scope or thematic scope or the general any other kind of scope that is determined. Maybe it could be in terms of timing. If for instance the evaluation is to be done every after 4 months, then is it possible, is it justifiable, or can it be done? So that's the whole idea of evaluability. Okay, so the purpose of it is to decide to evaluate or not. Yeah, because if evaluability process goes through the whole process and then it is determined that maybe it's not feasible or it's not conducive or it can't be done, or there are more challenges that may not allow such evaluation to happen, then the management or an institution can decide not to evaluate and first work on particular issues. So the purpose of evaluability assessment is also to help in preparing necessary conditions for evaluation, because if we are talking about, for instance, feasibility or uh, just if it's just viable, then what kind of, for instance, resources are needed, or what conditions in terms of whether the agency has some particular strength to do such evaluation as planned. But of course, it's also to identify challenges to inform realistic evaluation, so that the evaluators avoid the risk of relying on ideal while neglecting what is possible within the reality, if evaluation is to happen. Uh, Also, of course, the evaluability assessment indeed aims at ensuring that the intervention is ready for evaluation, and then of course that's how evaluability is done. So evaluability of gender and equity focus of course depend on whether gender and equity are primary focus of intervention, or whether or which disaggregated information was systematically collected about different groups, including vulnerable groups. For instance, this number two depends on what we just discussed in the session on analyzing inequities experienced by vulnerable groups. So if such disaggregated data is available, then evaluability would be able to have enough information to determine whether the characteristics of intervention or can allow evaluation to happen. So the evaluability depends on one, the focus of intervention; two, the disaggregated information that is available uh, about different groups that are affected or that are influencing intervention processes. So the focus of evaluation can be ranked, or evaluability process can rank the level of evaluability of an intervention from low to medium or high. And if it is low, it means that gender and equity issues perhaps were not considered or are not considered in that intervention. Disaggregated data on gender and equity is not available. Stakeholder analysis was not done as it should have been done, or not at all. And in that case, if such an intervention has such characteristics, then its level of evaluability is very low, and therefore the management needs to first hold on to carry out evaluation and first revise or make sure that such issues are addressed before evaluation is done. In cases where gender and equity issues are considered to some extent, but with limited disaggregated data that is captured, and also with limited stakeholder diversity, then that intervention is ranked medium in terms of evaluability, meaning that yes, the the management could decide to proceed, but put strong measures in addressing those challenges at certain point of time to make sure that the evaluation would be successful. Or the management can also put a hold on evaluation proceeding to make sure that they first address such information limitations. But if the intervention is characterized by gender and equity issues clearly considered and reflected in intervention, and the disaggregated data about different groups, especially the worse off, is captured, and stakeholder diversity is considered within the intervention, then the focus is high, and therefore the evaluability is high. And in that case, the management or evaluation team is good to go in terms of evaluation. So this is how evaluability is can be done in this case. Yeah, so the determining evaluability, so you have the level of gender and equity considerations would influence evaluation questions, of course. Who does, in terms of, for instance, who does it, can it be external consultants, or it can be internal, or it can be both, or it can be joint evaluation. And of course, a range of situations or challenges met requiring different responses. So this is how important it is to do evaluability, that if evaluability is not done from the beginning, then the management risks the risks to have a failure in terms of process of evaluation. For instance, if such information is found not to be available when evaluation has already commenced. So it's better to determine such information, and therefore determine the level of evaluability before any evaluation activity is done. So you could check, for instance, some of the evaluability challenges and approaches, and of course also regarding the ranks, um, in Bamberg and Segon, but also Unique could give you some more information on how such challenges regarding evaluability, for instance, during medium or low or ranks, those how those challenges can be approached so that evaluation can proceed. Level 3 of preparation is about, of course, stakeholder analysis. now that we already have the manager, evaluation manager, and we already have we've worked on determining evaluability of an intervention, then we move ahead and do stakeholder analysis and engagement. So as Bamberg and Segon state, that it comes, of course, with challenges. It could be institutional, budget, and time, but stakeholder involvement, especially the works of groups, um, in designing, planning, and implementation of evaluation is fundamental principle of any equity and gender-focused evaluation. So it is very important that stakeholders are analyzed and therefore determine how they will be engaged in the process of evaluation before we go any further. An example is if you are looking at an intervention regarding, let's say, women empowerment, then who is therefore uh, essential to be involved in the evaluation process. So stakeholder identification and analysis, that we are saying that if evaluability assessment determines that the evaluation can be done, of course with measures to respond to the different challenges, then stakeholders to participate in evaluation can be identified, analyzed, and therefore engaged. Of course, it's an emphasis here to say that all groups of beneficiaries, regardless of their gender, regardless of religion, regardless of all those identities that we looked at that influence the intersections of inequities and the associated factors, that all those groups of beneficiaries have rights to participate in intervention processes aimed at promoting equity. Because if they are not indeed if equity is not, if they are not involved, then we evaluators risk to be challenged with information that does not capture realities of all those different groups. So some of the key questions for identifying stakeholders may include such as follows. Asking the question of who will get involved. Is it men? Is it women? Is it children? Is it old? Is it disabled? They refugees? Who are they? Who do we need to involve? Because determining who or knowing who should be involved would give an idea on how they can be engaged and what kind of data is available for their engagement. What roles and responsibilities will they have? Are they going to participate in designing, in implementation, in resource mobilization, or in dissemination? How are these stakeholders going to participate in the evaluation process? Why or for what purpose? Why, for instance, would women be engaged, or why would youth be engaged in evaluation process? Do they have any significant influence on the impact or on the outcomes of the intervention or outcomes of the evaluation process in terms of usage and generation of information? Uh, what priority or what importance is of their involvement? Perhaps you could be looking for the differentiation, the differences between uh, uh, different groups in terms of their involvement and benefit of the intervention. When will they be engaged? At what stage? Is it during design? Is it during implementation only? Is it also that after doing a participatory evaluation, kind of even during uh, uh, writing reports and so on, they would be involved, and how will they be engaged? Of course, this is some kind of terms of evaluation methods. Is it will they be engaged through just data collection methods such as focus groups or interviews, or they will also fully participate in terms of designing and collection of data, and also having them to participate in disseminating information that has been generated. So all these are key issues that can be asked in order to do stakeholder analysis and engagement. So you have your questions here, and we put them in a tabular form, and then you have, of course, this is how you can do your analysis, and this stakeholder analysis can be of course found in the unique guideline. So under the stakeholders and segregated as appropriate, of course, you have those with authority to make decisions related to the intervention. So you have, for instance, managers. Remember the manager we already identified in phase one of the preparation. Then you have those who have direct responsibility for the intervention. Again, could have managers or uh, the staff working on the implementation of the intervention. You could have secondary duty bearers who are, for instance, private sector. These could be participating in terms of procurement and supply of equipment or other resource needed to implement the intervention. Then you have intervention beneficiaries, could be women, men, girls, boys, and other groups desegregated. Then you have those who are in a position disadvantaged by the intervention, regarding the fact that we talked about development processes as power laden also. So there could be some that do not have particular privileges to take the advantage or access opportunities and benefits of the intervention. And then you have other interest groups who are not directly participating in intervention but may influence the outcomes of the intervention. You could it could be an NGO working on a certain project within a community, but there are other NGOs that might have interest in such projects, or groups of beneficiaries that have, or groups of other people that have an interest um, in in the project. So this is how you could do the stakeholder analysis. So for instance, if it comes to management, then you could ask what is its role in evaluation, why it is important to engage them in the evaluation, how important is it, why is it important to have them as a priority, and when can we engage them, but also how ways they can participate in the evaluation processes. So that matrix applies for each of the stakeholders that are involved. Of course, there are benefits of stakeholder participation in gender and equity focused evaluation, and this comes with diverse contributions, putting into consideration that there is awareness of differences of subgroups that are affected differently in terms of intended or unintended benefits that result from the interventions. But it can also help in learning or acquiring information that regarding the information that we want to use from evaluation. And of course, this has an influence on the efficacy of such kind of information if it is generated. So the management can learn from such information. But also another benefit for having stakeholder participation and engagement is that it helps in identifying how capacities can be built or empowering some of the stakeholders as main participants of the evaluation process. If you take an example, if an intervention is working within communities that are illiterate, then if we are to use a participatory methodology of engaging stakeholders, then some of these stakeholders must be empowered in this case to be able to participate well in the evaluation process in terms of generation of knowledge and usage. There is also engagement of participation of stakeholders to participate in gender and equity evaluation, also help in strengthening accountability, because it could be accountability in terms of information generation and usage. It could be accountability in terms of knowing how resources are applied or have been applied. So it's very important that stakeholders are considered at all levels and all categories of stakeholders, all those possible categories of people or institutions that have an influence on the intervention, or those that could be uh, impacted by the intervention itself. Uh, Having stakeholders participate in the evaluation process also builds trust and reduces disagreements, because at the end of the day, if they all are engaged, then they should come to agreements regarding certain processes. It also guarantees credibility, because different opinions can result from engagement of all different stakeholders. But it is also a means of equity building in itself, because if you're considering different groups, including the worst of, then it means that at least each group is catered for in the process of evaluation, and therefore that could increase some level of ownership and enhance usage of evaluation at the end of the exercise. So stakeholder analysis can also be act as a tool for addressing problems of bias in evaluation, where you have, for instance, well-educated professionals who can do evaluation, and then when they get to particular communities, they act in a way that is not respecting, that is not culturally competent or ethical, and therefore risking problems associated with bias. So engaging different stakeholders then would help us in addressing such problems that are associated with bias. Yeah, so but of course the engagement of stakeholders comes with certain principles, which may include inclusiveness, meaning that, yeah, all other stakeholders, as long as they have an impact on the project, or whether the project has an impact on them, there must be some level of inclusiveness. And of course also participatory, it must be participatory and reflective. There must be respect of different cultures, different stakeholders and opinions, and so on. It must be transparent and accountability. So those are some of the important principles of, again, related to the general principles of carrying out equity focused and gender responsive evaluation. The third the third aspect is identifying intended users, the intended use and intended users of the evaluation, the evaluation information, and so on. So successful evaluation equals use of uh, success successful evaluation equals uh, use of evaluation information. So in simple terms, what I'm trying to say is that again, evaluation information is not of any importance if it's not put into usage. So therefore we must, it's necessary that during preparation we identify those who need to use the information, but also know the purpose for which they want to use the information. So, though high quality evaluation reports are important, they might not guarantee the usage of findings. So, management or institutions, organizations, or project staff could have very well organized reports containing all the necessary information that is relevant for in making informed decisions. But if it does not guarantee that those particular findings would be used. So it's very important that the management during preparation identifies how they can guarantee that these findings will be used. So therefore determining all necessary possible strategies of disseminating such information for usage. So in that case, it's important that we determine who will use the findings and for what purpose. And users may include top management, middle managers, field implementers of the intervention, the funders, or beneficiaries, including vulnerable and worse-off groups, and others that have direct or indirect involvement in the intervention, including maybe private sector and so on. So it's very important that all these are considered, and then the importance for why they need to use the information is also determined. Some of the key considerations when determining the intended use by intended users could include considerations of organizational structure in terms of leadership and authority, who is going to influence what kind of information is disseminated and how it will be used, or personal factors in terms of leadership, interest, enthusiasm, determination, commitment, and also caring for specific individual people. Because if then that such personal factor is not considered, then there is a likelihood that some intended users may not be identified, or the purpose of for why they need to use information, that itself also may not be considered. So it's very important that users and the purpose for which they need to use certain information is considered. So there is also, of course, identification of potential challenges that may affect the evaluability that might affect the evaluation process. So it's very important that such challenges are identified during preparation phase, so that particular strategies can be laid to see how such can be addressed. So identify at this phase, there is identification of challenges to implementing gender focused evaluation, and it's important to do it in the early stages of evaluation, so that we can develop meaningful and significant strategies to address those challenges when it comes to implementation of the evaluation processes. And of course, there are many challenges, but they vary from context to context. We already talked about evaluation and development processes as context driven processes. So even challenges vary from context to context. And of course, some of the challenges related to promoting gender and equity focused evaluation may include reluctance to accept desegregated indicators, for instance indicators regarding how women are benefiting from particular interventions, or how children are benefiting from particular interventions, or youth versus adults, and so on. There is also a challenge of political and social resistance to addressing the causes of exclusion and vulnerability. For instance, if the government the government is in charge, then in some cases, there is no political will to address such causes of exclusion. There is also resistance to empowerment of worst of groups, especially if we are dealing with projects that are working on the elites, where you have the small number of rich people or those who have power within communities to want to capture particular intervention processes, and therefore rejecting or limiting empowerment of worst of groups, including such women or elders or disabled and so on. There is, of course, also lack of interest, and incentives may not be available to invest in uplifting or empowering worst of groups, including the poor and those that are vulnerable. Bad governance also becomes a problem. So even if we have, in some cases, considering, for instance, Uganda and many other countries that have decentralized system, where local governments also have some discretion power to make their own decisions, if such are reluctant in making in implementing good governance principles, then that could be a problem in terms of responding to the needs of different stakeholders that are affecting the project or that are being affected by the intervention. Of course, the legal status of worst of groups also is important, e.g. the refugees, the fact that they do not have citizenship, or they are just legally protected within different geographical areas, that itself puts them at an advantage when it comes also to including them in the evaluation processes. It puts them at a disadvantage. There are also challenges related to implementation of gender and equity focused evaluation, which may come with methodological challenges in terms of, for instance, complex interventions that may lead to intended or unintended intended or unintended outcomes. There could also be lack of disaggregated data or data collection capacity, or reluctance to change existing methodologies. So if there is no flexibility for evaluators or evaluation teams or managers to approve and be flexible to review the evaluation procedures or protocols, then that becomes a problem. For instance, maybe the previous evaluation aimed at collecting data, generalizing entire community, rather than breaking the beneficiaries into groups of maybe women versus men, or youth versus adults, or children versus adults. So if such flexibility is not applied by management, then that might indeed create problems of lacking disaggregated data that is important for implementing equity focused or gender focused evaluation. There could also be a challenge of getting additional costs, and of course that come with complexity. We already said that the ideal is always different from reality. We might have perfect plans, but when it comes to implementation, the context determines whether such costs would be enough or not. So if the management is not willing to add more money or resources in terms of carrying out the evaluation, that could also become a challenge to equity focused evaluation. There could also be reluctance of some of the governments to work with civil society organizations, for instance, where you have the government is at loggerheads with civil society organizations. For instance, if the civil society organizations have been challenging government's activities, maybe the government is not indeed living to its purpose, then if you have those advocacy organizations that deal with activism and so on, therefore trying to have interventions that challenge the government's role, then the government could have also become a problem when it comes to evaluation of the activities of certain interventions. Of course, other challenges are related to, for instance, humanitarian settings, such as, of course, differentials in crisis effects, therefore challenging equity-focused evaluation processes. So the bottom line, of course, is that effectiveness of gender responsive and equity focused evaluation depends on better designs that integrate and are ably forecasting gender and equity concerns, and therefore better preparations are important to address such challenges and issues. So we already said that the, the the process for preparation also includes development of terms of references, but also selecting a technically and ethically suitable team that would do the evaluation. So we're gonna take a look into that in the next session. So these are some of the readings you could access for your help in terms of more learning regarding this session. So you could check them out. Of course, most of them are our main readings for all the sessions, but yeah, so I'll keep reminding you on which readings are important or not. So that marks the end of this session, and thank you.